This check looks fake as hell. You probably printed it at home, like all you people do." The words sliced through the quiet hum of the bank like a razor. Jessica Harper didn't even look up as she tore the check in half. The pieces fluttered down onto the marble counter like dead leaves. For a moment, silence gripped the room. Then the murmurs began. Soft at first, then sharper, as if disbelief had to warm itself up before boiling over. "Before we begin this powerful story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe respect is earned, not judged by appearance, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories that challenge injustice and uplift the human spirit. Now, let me take you back to that Thursday afternoon in September 2023, right in the heart of downtown Chicago. James Reynolds stood still, his hands calm and steady on the counter. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. Not yet. At 50 years old. James had learned that silence sometimes made the loudest point. He wore a simple gray t-shirt, faded jeans, and work boots. To someone like Jessica, that meant trouble. To anyone who looked closer, it meant humility, resilience, and survival. Jessica didn't bother to verify the 4215 disability check. She didn't scan it. She didn't make a call. She just made a judgment, one that had nothing to do with paper and everything to do with pigment. She smirked, brushing imaginary lint from her lakefront bank blazer. "I don't have time for games," she added loudly, so the surrounding customers could hear. Among them stood Sofia Alvarez, a 25-year-old barista on her lunch break. She watched, wide-eyed, then reached for her phone and tapped live on Instagram. "This is wild," she whispered. "I'm at Lakefront Bank on Michigan Avenue and y'all won't believe this." Behind James, Harold Jenkins, a 68-year-old Vietnam veteran with a limp and a cane, shifted uncomfortably. He'd seen this before. Different decade. Same poison. "That ain't right," he muttered. Loud enough for those nearby to hear. "That man stood up for this country. Show him some respect." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Do you even know him?" "Sir?" Harold lifted his chin. "No, but I know a soldier when I see one, and I know ignorance when I hear it." Jessica leaned back, visibly irritated. "If either of you have a problem," she snapped, "you can take it up with my manager, or better yet, security." It was then that assistant manager Ethan Caldwell approached, swagger in his step, suit too sharp for the humility the moment demanded. "What's the issue here?" he asked, glancing at James like he was scanning a threat. "This man brought in a fake check," Jessica said quickly. "I destroyed it." "Destroyed it?" Ethan echoed, surprised but not concerned. His eyes narrowed. "Do you have ID?" "Sir?" James reached into his back pocket and calmly pulled out a worn leather wallet. He placed his military ID on the counter. "James Reynolds," he said, his voice even, Silver Star recipient, combat action badge, 3 tours, Iraq. Ethan looked at the ID briefly, then smirked. That could be fake too. We've had all kinds of scams lately. People dress the part. Sofia's live stream was up to 150 viewers now, the comments pouring in like wildfire. He a veteran? And they tore up his check? What if this some Jim Crow nonsense? Somebody call corporate. Now. James glanced around. He saw smartphones raised like torches, eyes filled with outrage, confusion, discomfort. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. He simply said, "I'd like to speak with your regional director." Ethan folded his arms. "You'll speak to the branch manager. That's as high as you go today." Jessica looked pleased, but Harold was not having it. "This man deserves better. You don't treat someone like this. Not a veteran. Not anybody," Harold said. Stepping forward, James checked his watch. A silver Patek Philippe. Subtle, understated, but unmistakably real. He murmured softly, 38 minutes left." Ethan frowned. What's that supposed to mean? James didn't answer. Instead, he reached into a slim leather folio and pulled out a sealed envelope. The room seemed to exhale. Jessica's smirk faded. Even Ethan's expression shifted to unease. James set the envelope down carefully. Before you dig the hole any deeper, open this. Karen Mitchell, the branch manager. Finally arrived, stern, rushed, her expression tight with frustration. What's going on here? She snapped. Jessica spoke first, quickly spinning her version. Suspicious man, fake check, fake ID. Harold over here's causing a scene, and now he's handing out envelopes. Karen turned to James. Sir, if you're not here for valid business, I'll have to ask you to leave. James didn't blink. Then I suggest you open that envelope first. It's addressed to you. Karen hesitated, then peeled the seal open. Inside was a letter on official Lakefront Bank letterhead, with a gold emblem pressed into the corner. Her eyes moved quickly over the lines, then stopped, her face drained of color. Ethan stepped closer, trying to read over her shoulder. What is it? Karen looked up at James slowly. You're the chief compliance officer? James nodded. That's correct. Jessica's knees nearly gave out. Ethan stepped back like he'd touched a live wire. Karen stammered. Why didn't you say anything sooner? I did, James said calmly. I said I wanted to speak with the regional director. Sophia's live stream exploded past 5,000 viewers. Comments flooded in. Yo, he's an exec? She just tore up her job in real time. Someone get popcorn. Outside. The faint chop of helicopter blades began to echo across Michigan Avenue. A black SUV pulled up in front of the branch. Someone whispered. What is going on? Inside. James adjusted his posture ever so slightly, the calm in his voice now carrying the weight of full authority. This isn't just about me, he said. It's about the 52 other incidents we've documented across 39 branches. This one included. Karen swayed slightly where she stood. James turned to Jessica. You judged me by my boots, not by my record. And now, your record begins. Ethan Caldwell's jaw clenched as the weight of James Reynolds' identity settled over the room like a heavy fog. The tension didn't subside, it twisted tighter. This doesn't change the fact that you caused a disruption, Ethan insisted, his voice louder now, a crack of false authority behind it. Karen Mitchell, still pale, didn't respond. She clutched the envelope like a lifeline, her eyes darting between James and the security cameras overhead, as if hoping one would somehow delete what had just occurred. Jessica Harper stood stiff, her hands trembling slightly, the smugness gone, replaced by dread. But it was too late. Sophia Alvarez's live stream had ballooned to 1,200 viewers, and the comments were relentless. Name and shame the staff. He's a war hero, not a criminal. Someone call Channel 7. The hashtag Lakefront Bank Shame had begun trending in Chicago within minutes. James remained calm, but his presence now carried the weight of command. He looked at Ethan and spoke in a low, unwavering tone. You're not just dealing with a customer, Mr. Caldwell. You're dealing with a compliance investigation. And right now, you're failing. Ethan's lips curled slightly, but the fire in his eyes faltered. He gestured toward the check remains and barked. We're still not processing anything until we get confirmation. That ID could be fake. That envelope could be forged. Is that your official position? James asked. One brow raised. You're rejecting a federal disability compensation check from a documented veteran in front of witnesses and recording devices? Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the two security guards hovering nearby. Escort him out. But neither of them moved. One of them, Officer Daniels, a tall black man in his 40s with short-cropped hair, studied James's posture, then his eyes, then the emblem on his watch. There was a flash of recognition. Daniels spoke up. Sir, I served in Fallujah. You were the one who got hit in the supply convoy, weren't you? James gave a small nod. 3rd Battalion, 2006. Daniels turned to Ethan and said flatly, I'm not removing him. The room seemed to freeze. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Jessica backed away, trying to disappear into the teller line. Sophia kept filming, now whispering into the mic. This just turned into something huge. He's a decorated vet, and the guard knows him. This is live. Y'all, unedited. The crowd of customers had grown. A businessman with a Patek Philippe watch, a woman with a stroller, an elderly couple holding hands, and all of them were watching, recording, sharing. Harold Jenkins stepped closer and placed a hand gently on James's shoulder. You want me to speak for you? Son? James shook his head slowly. Not yet. He turned to Karen. Manager to manager? Is this the culture you fostered here? Karen looked down, her voice thin. I followed procedure? No, James replied evenly. You followed prejudice? You followed silence? And that silence? It ends today. He glanced at the live stream counter. 3,400 viewers, climbing by the second. The bank's Wi-Fi flickered, but Sophia had already activated a hotspot. They can't shut this down, she whispered. Not unless they cut the power. James reached into his leather folio once more and pulled out a printed sheet. Graphs, tables, incident reports. This branch, he began, raising his voice just enough for all to hear, has had 4 times the national average in racial discrimination complaints. 37 formal customer grievances, most dismissed internally, until now. He set the documents on the counter beside the torn check. This isn't just about what you see. It's about what you've chosen not to see. For years, Ethan scoffed, but his voice cracked. You don't have the authority to make demands, James calmly replied. Then let me make a request. Call your regional director. Now. She's in Springfield. Karen stammered. She's not. She'll be here. James interrupted. Trust me. Outside. The sound of rotor blades began to grow louder. A distant chop. Customers pressed against the glass. A helicopter descended slowly, wind whipping through the bank's revolving door. The crowd outside had tripled. Phones were everywhere. The moment was no longer private. It was public, historic, inevitable. Sophia whispered to her camera. This isn't just about a check anymore. This is about what happens when people finally say, enough, inside. Ethan tried once more to salvage control. This is still a secure financial institution. You're jeopardizing client trust. No, James said, his voice sharp now. You did that when you let bias run this branch, when you tore up a veteran's check without cause, when you tried to throw me out because I didn't fit your image of who belongs in a bank. He leaned in slightly, not threatening, just commanding. You judged me by what I wore. You forgot to check who I am, at that moment. The door burst open, and in walked Olivia Chen, regional director, gray suit, tablet in hand, heels echoing like gavel strikes. She paused only a moment before locking eyes with James. Mr. Reynolds, she said formally. Is everything in order? James nodded slightly. Not yet, but it will be. Olivia turned to Karen. Why didn't you call me? Karen stuttered. We thought, we didn't know who he was. Olivia turned her gaze to Ethan and Jessica. And that gave you the right to destroy a federal check? To insult a decorated officer? Ethan stepped forward. Desperate. He never identified himself. He didn't have to. Olivia snapped. Respect is not conditional. The bank had grown silent again. James looked at the torn check, still lying on the marble, then at Sophia's phone. 6,000 live viewers now. The country was watching, and it wasn't over yet. James Reynolds stood with a quiet authority that no badge or title could fabricate. The shredded check, still lying like evidence on the marble countertop. Hadn't moved. But everything else in the bank had. Karen Mitchell's throat was dry as she stepped back behind the teller line, her fingers nervously clenching the compliance letter James had handed her. She had worked at Lakefront Bank for over 15 years and had never once seen the regional director arrive in person, let alone by helicopter. And now, Olivia Chen was here, unannounced, but unmistakably prepared. The tension in her steps slicing the stale air of panic that hung over every employee in sight. Jessica Harper tried to steady herself at her station, but her knees betrayed her, brushing the stool behind her as she sat down quickly, hands trembling. Ethan Caldwell, still clinging to some illusion of control, straightened his tie and stepped toward Olivia. With all due respect, he began. But Olivia raised her hand. "Don't," she said sharply. "I've been watching the live stream for the last 7 minutes. Don't waste your breath on a version of events the entire internet has already disproved." The silence that followed was unbearable. Phones had been recording non-stop. Sofia Alvarez's stream had now passed 5,000 live viewers. But it wasn't just the number. It was who was watching. Local journalists, veteran networks, a representative from the ACLU. Hashtags were spreading. Hashtag veterans deserve respect. Hashtag banking while black. And hashtag Reynolds reckoning. The live stream chat was exploding, filled with angry emojis, American flags, and demands for accountability. James didn't move. He didn't have to. The room had already begun orbiting him. "Ms. Chen," he said calmly, "I'd like you to hear something." He reached into his folio once again and pulled out a printed report, 36 pages, bound, tabbed, with his signature and the Lakefront Bank Board seal stamped on the cover. "This is a 6-month internal audit. I was assigned by the board to conduct a covert equity assessment of our branches. I came today as part of a scheduled audit, unannounced, as instructed." He laid the document down on the counter. Olivia picked it up and began flipping through it. Her face, already serious, grew more grave with each page. "This can't be right," she murmured. James nodded. "It is. Page 9. This branch ranks number 1 in customer complaints citing racial or appearance-based discrimination. 4 times the national branch average. 32 unresolved cases. 7 formal letters from customers that were internally dismissed. 1 former employee whistleblower whose resignation was buried under a confidentiality clause. I verified every detail." Olivia looked up. "And today makes 33. "Correct," James said. "And it's now gone public. In real time." A sharp intake of breath came from someone behind the teller window. Ethan spoke up, his voice noticeably less confident. "That data can be contextualized." James turned toward him slowly. "Would you like me to read your name on page 16? Ethan's jaw locked. It says, "Assistant Manager Ethan Caldwell, subject of 2 past HR reviews for discriminatory conduct, both closed without consequence due to internal referrals. You were promoted 6 months later." Jessica looked over at Ethan, eyes wide. Karen visibly shrank. Sofia, holding her phone steady, whispered into the mic, "He's not just a customer. He's an executive, a whistleblower." And the bank tried to pretend he was disposable. Harold Jenkins, still standing quietly at James's side, let out a single, satisfied chuckle. "Lord have mercy," he said softly. "They messed with the wrong one." Olivia looked at her assistant, who had arrived moments earlier and was now reviewing the full audit on a tablet. "Have legal review this tonight," she said. "We'll issue a formal response to the board before close of business." Then she turned to Jessica. "You're dismissed, effective immediately." Jessica gasped. "What? Clean out your station. HR will call you tomorrow," Olivia said coldly. "You tore up a government check, denied a veteran service without verification, and violated federal transaction compliance policy. That alone could cost this bank its charter. Ethan stepped forward, rage bubbling just beneath his skin. You don't have the right to fire people without internal due process. Olivia turned to him sharply. You're right, but James Reynolds does. There was a pause. Then Olivia handed James her tablet. Would you like to initiate the personnel decisions? Mr. Reynolds? James tapped the screen once. Termination. Confirmed. He handed it back. Mr. Caldwell, your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Your badge and keys. Please. Ethan looked stunned. This is outrageous. So was your conduct, James replied, repeatedly, and documented. A ripple of gasps echoed around the room as Ethan slowly removed his lanyard and tossed it onto the counter. Jessica, already in tears, walked out with her purse clutched tightly, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Karen looked on, trembling. And me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James turned to her slowly. You're not fired. Yet. But you are demoted. Effective immediately. Your new role is teller. You'll complete mandatory bias training and compliance retraining within 30 days. You will not supervise another team until you earn the trust you lost today. Karen nodded once, quietly stunned. James turned toward the customers, now gathered in silence, watching history unfold. This isn't vengeance, he said. It's accountability, and it's overdue. Harold, nodding slowly, added, ain't about payback, it's about respect. At that moment, Olivia placed her hand gently on James's shoulder. What you did today didn't just expose a problem, you created a solution. If you're ready, I'd like you to present your proposal now. James nodded. The time had come. But first, he turned back to the counter. The shredded check was still there. He gently gathered the pieces, pressed them together, and looked at a nearby employee. Tape. Please, he said. They handed it to him without a word. He taped it calmly, then slid it across the counter. I'd like to complete my deposit, he said. And then, we'll change everything. As James Reynolds slid the taped check across the marble counter, the entire room held its breath, not because of the money, but because of what it symbolized, dignity reclaimed. The young teller who now stood behind the counter, a quiet man named Luis, took the check with two hands and nodded, visibly shaken but respectful. No words were needed. His trembling fingers fed the check into the machine, and with one beep, the transaction began. James didn't even glance at the screen. He was focused on something else now, something larger. Olivia Chen stepped forward, her tablet still in hand, and addressed the entire room, effective immediately. Lakefront Bank is adopting a reform initiative titled the Equity Protocol. She announced, cameras were rolling, phones pointed in every direction. The air was electric. She continued, this protocol, authored by Mr. Reynolds and backed by the board, includes mandatory bias training for all front-facing employees, randomized compliance audits, a rolling review of internal complaint records, and most critically, a new app called SpeakFair that allows customers and employees to anonymously report discriminatory behavior in real time. Whispers filled the lobby. A few claps, then a rising cheer from the crowd. Sofia Alvarez captured the moment with steady hands, her live stream reaching 15,000 viewers by the minute. You're witnessing history, she said into the mic. A new standard is being born right in front of us. James raised a hand to quiet the room. This isn't about punishing people. It's about fixing a system that's been broken for too long. We can't heal what we won't admit exists. And today, finally, we've stopped pretending. Karen Mitchell, still standing in the corner, blinked back tears. She wasn't the same woman who smirked beside Jessica an hour earlier. Now she was someone staring down a long, uncomfortable mirror. I didn't see it, she whispered. I truly didn't see it until now. James nodded. Then that's your beginning, not your end. Security escorted Jessica and Ethan out the front doors, where cameras and reporters had already begun assembling. Flashbulbs exploded, microphones extended like spears. Ms. Harper, do you have any comment on the incident? Mr. Caldwell, is it true you had prior complaints? Neither answered. They moved briskly to a black sedan, heads low, drowned in a swarm of consequences, back inside. Harold Jenkins stepped beside James, his cane tapping with each step. He raised his voice, not for himself, but for everyone watching online. I remember when folks like us weren't even allowed in the front doors of banks like this, he said. We had to go through side entrances, cash checks at pawn shops, hide our uniforms when we got home from war. And today I saw something I never thought I'd live to see. I saw a brother stand his ground, not with fists, with facts, with grace, and with truth. Applause erupted. It wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about everyone who had ever walked into a bank and been seen as less than, as suspicious, as unworthy. James glanced at Sophia, who was now crying quietly behind her phone. He gave her a small nod. You were brave enough to press record. That took guts. She smiled through tears. I just wanted people to see what I saw. Olivia Chen approached the center of the room once more. The equity protocol goes into effect immediately at this branch. She declared, all branches across the Midwest will follow within 30 days, the rest of the country within 90, and James Reynolds will lead the oversight team. With board-level authority, a new cheer erupted. Sophia's phone now showed 22,000 viewers. Hashtag Equity Protocol was trending nationwide. Outside, a Channel 5 news van parked on the curb. Reporters waved from the windows. Change had arrived. Loud and public. Let this be a warning, Olivia added. Not to those who make honest mistakes, but to those who weaponize bias. This is not the old world. This is the one we're building now. Together. A small child, no more than 7, stood with his mother near the front of the line. He tugged her sleeve and pointed at James. Is he a superhero? He asked. She smiled and knelt beside him. No, baby, he's a veteran. And today, he reminded them what a hero really looks like. James turned and looked through the large glass windows of the bank. The Chicago skyline shimmered beyond. But what he saw most clearly was the reflection of himself, standing tall not in spite of the years behind him, but because of them. Luis handed back the receipt. It's done. Sir, he said. James took it, folded it once, and tucked it into his wallet without looking. That check, that small slip of paper, had ignited a wildfire of reckoning. But more importantly, it had ignited a blueprint for change. As the doors reopened to the public, and the line resumed movement, James stepped aside. He didn't need applause. He didn't need revenge. He just needed to know that when the next man walked in, dressed in jeans, boots, and a life full of battles, he wouldn't have to fight one more. And that, finally, was starting to feel possible. The morning after the chaos at Lakefront Bank, news anchors across Chicago led with the same story. Chief Compliance Officer goes undercover, reveals systemic discrimination at Lakefront Bank, read the bold chyron across every major channel. The footage from Sofia Alvarez's live stream had been replayed across the country, on cable, on morning radio, in veterans groups, on social media, but inside Lakefront Bank's downtown headquarters, something far more important was happening. In a private boardroom on the 42nd floor, James Reynolds stood at the head of a long oak table surrounded by executives who, just 48 hours earlier, had barely known his name. Now they listened in silence. On the screen behind him were the words, "The Equity Protocol, 12 Steps Toward Institutional Reform." James didn't speak in corporate jargon. He didn't flood the room with buzzwords. He spoke like a man who had seen the cost of silence and knew that fixing this wasn't just good PR. It was necessary survival. Bias isn't always loud, he said, his tone steady. It's quiet. It shows up in patterns, in who gets a second glance, in who gets told no without reason. And if we're not willing to track it, own it, and change it, then we're part of it. Olivia Chen nodded firmly. She had already approved a $5.8 million budget for the national rollout of the protocol. But what impressed her most wasn't the scope of James's plan. It was the simplicity. Step 1. Transparent transaction logs. Every declined check, delayed transfer, and denied service would now be automatically logged and reviewed for bias indicators. Step 2. Quarterly bias audits, conducted by rotating third-party firms, with public summaries published every 90 days. Step 3. SpeakFair app, already live, allowing employees and customers to anonymously report discriminatory treatment. Step 4. Real-time intervention teams, a task force trained in conflict de-escalation and anti-bias intervention, ready to respond within hours of a flagged incident. No more sweeping things under the rug, James said. Clicking to the next slide, no more protecting power at the cost of people. As he walked the room through each reform, data monitoring, employee retraining, community outreach grants, and mandatory veteran service liaisons, he saw something shift in the room, not just agreement, ownership. Olivia leaned in. "What about customer loss?" she asked. "We ran a back-end analysis." James replied, "This branch alone lost 42% of its black clientele over the past 12 months. Do you know what that equates to?" He clicked again. 15.3 million in lost business. And if we're sued under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act for what happened to me, or to any of those other 32 people, that figure doubles. The CFO turned pale. The general counsel scribbled notes. The silence that followed wasn't resistance. It was realization. James let that silence breathe, then added, "What we're building isn't just protection against lawsuits. It's protection of our values. It's the foundation of trust." At that, Olivia stood. "Then as of today," she said, "we adopt the equity protocol as a national model, and we rename the core framework, the Reynolds Standard." James blinked. "That wasn't necessary." "It is," Olivia said, her voice firm but warm. "Because names matter, symbols matter, and you didn't just audit a bank. You made us look in the mirror." Downstairs, the branch where it all started had already begun its transformation. Posters promoting SpeakFair lined the walls. A new mural was commissioned by a local black artist, an abstract tribute to dignity, healing, and resilience in the break room. Former branch manager Karen Mitchell was completing her first online module in unconscious bias training. The screen asked her a simple question. "Have you ever made a decision based on someone's appearance?" She stared at the words for a long time, then typed, "Yes, and I'm ready to change." Meanwhile, Jessica Harper had gone silent on social media, but reports surfaced that she had reached out to a veterans support group asking how to volunteer. Ethan Caldwell, according to insiders, had begun legal consultations, but privately admitted to a former colleague. "I pushed too far, and I never asked myself why." Back in the loop, Sofia Alvarez received an email she never expected. A full scholarship offer from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. Citing her live stream as a watershed moment in citizen reporting, she printed it out, stared at the paper in disbelief, and whispered to herself, "This." All started with pressing record. But perhaps the most touching shift was Harold Jenkins, in the weeks following the incident. He became a local hero among Chicago's veteran community, with James's help. He launched a campaign called #StillServing, urging veterans across the country to document moments of bias and stand together, not with anger, but with purpose. One photo from that campaign went viral. Harold, cane in one hand, American flag in the other, standing in front of the bank doors where it all began, wearing a t-shirt that read, "Respect isn't optional." In a span of just 6 weeks, 15 other major banks began reaching out to Lakefront's compliance division, requesting blueprints of the equity protocol. Public trust surveys showed a 17% increase in community confidence. Lakefront's stock rose 18%, defying projections. What started as an insult had become infrastructure. What began as humiliation became a movement. James Reynolds didn't want credit. He wanted results. And now, across Chicago and beyond, he was starting to see them, reflected not in headlines, but in actions. People no longer whispered when they saw a veteran walk into a bank. They stood. They smiled. They remembered. 6 months had passed since James Reynolds walked into Lakefront Bank with nothing more than a check, a quiet purpose, and a lifetime of earned dignity. And now, his actions had transformed the financial industry in ways no one could have predicted. What began as a local scandal had grown into a national reckoning. The Equity Protocol, once a pilot program designed for a single bank branch, had been adopted by 15 major financial institutions, including 2 of the country's largest national chains. Compliance officers across the country now referred to James's audit as the Reynolds Model, taught in executive ethics seminars and internal equity workshops. But the most powerful shift wasn't in policy. It was in public behavior. In branches from Boston to Bakersfield, customers reported seeing frontline staff behave differently, more attentive, more patient, more human. People noticed when a veteran entered the room. They noticed when someone who looked out of place was finally treated like they belonged. And they noticed when frontline employees, now trained under the protocol, corrected one another in real time, calmly, firmly, and with clarity. Sophia Alvarez, now a journalism student at Northwestern, had seen her live stream hit 3.2 million views on YouTube and TikTok combined. Her inbox overflowed with messages, some from strangers who had faced similar treatment, others from industry insiders admitting they had stayed silent too long. "You told the story we all knew was real," one viewer wrote. But this time, someone had the receipts. Her live stream was even included in a Harvard case study titled, "The Moment That Changed Compliance Forever." And though she was still in school, Sophia had become a sought-after voice on panels about citizen journalism, equity, and the ethics of silence. Meanwhile, Karen Mitchell, once a rigid manager who hid behind policy, was no longer hiding. After completing her mandatory training, she had chosen to go further, enrolling in a DEI certification program and volunteering to help train new hires on what not to do. She spoke honestly in those sessions, telling her story without spin. "I let fear disguise itself as professionalism," she confessed, "and I confused neutrality with fairness. But silence has a side, and now I choose to speak." Her transformation wasn't overnight, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. Even Jessica Harper, after months out of the spotlight, emerged with a public apology written in her own words. "I was wrong. I was afraid of being invisible, so I made others feel small. No excuse justifies it. I lost my job. But what I really lost was my decency, and I'm working to earn that back." She began volunteering with a local veterans shelter, not as a PR move, but as a quiet act of repair. Some forgave her, others didn't, but she kept showing up anyway. As for Ethan Caldwell, he remained largely out of the public eye. Internal sources confirmed he had filed a wrongful termination claim, which he later dropped. Word spread that he had entered therapy and had started attending community dialogues on workplace accountability. No interviews, no statements, just a man finally confronting what had been rotting beneath the surface for years, back at Lakefront Bank. The physical space had changed, The branch on Michigan Avenue now featured a glass display case near the entrance. Inside it, a folded copy of James Reynolds' original compliance audit. Alongside his torn and taped disability check, a brass plaque beneath read, "From transaction to transformation," in honor of veterans and every voice that refused to be ignored. Harold Jenkins visited often. Sometimes he'd bring coffee and just sit near the mural, greeting veterans who came in after hearing his name through the grapevine. "You're that man who stood up for him, right?" they'd ask. And Harold would smile gently. "No, son," he'd say. "I just made sure the world saw what he already was." He had become a local figure, invited to town halls, quoted in articles, even asked to deliver a keynote at a Veterans Equity Summit. But what mattered most to Harold wasn't the fame. It was that for the first time in years, people listened without skepticism when he shared his story. His scars weren't seen as complaints anymore. They were understood as evidence, and for once, that made him feel whole. James Reynolds, meanwhile, didn't seek the limelight. He worked behind the scenes, leading the national rollout of the Equity Protocol, training new compliance leaders, refining data dashboards, and ensuring that no branch could bury reports again. His office remained sparse, just a clean desk, a single photo of his platoon in Iraq, and a small bronze eagle given to him by Harold. When asked why he stayed so quiet, he simply replied, "Because the work speaks louder than I ever could." Yet even James could not stop the story from reaching farther than expected. The University of Chicago's Booth School of Business added the Reynolds Incident, from crisis to innovation, as a mandatory case study in its MBA ethics course. Netflix reached out about adapting the story into a documentary, and several lawmakers proposed legislation to expand anonymous reporting tools in banks, inspired directly by SpeakFair. But perhaps the most moving ripple of all came from a woman named Regina Daniels, a 65-year-old grandmother from St. Louis who had been denied a home loan years earlier for reasons no one could explain. She watched Sophia's video with tears in her eyes, then gathered her grandkids and said, This is why you never lower your head for anyone." She reopened her mortgage application the following week, and this time, she got approved, because something had shifted, not just in policy, but in people. And all because one man walked into a bank with a check, and when the world told him he wasn't enough, he showed them what integrity really looks like. The story of James Reynolds didn't end when the cameras turned off or when the headlines faded from the news cycle. In fact, that's when the true legacy began. 6 months after the incident at Lakefront Bank, what once felt like a contained act of courage had blossomed into a full-fledged movement. A quiet revolution reshaping how institutions treat people who don't fit the mold of privilege. #Equity Protocol had now trended in 15 countries, with social media users from London to Lagos sharing stories of discrimination, and more importantly, of accountability. The SpeakFair app, once viewed as an experiment, had processed over 18,000 anonymous reports across various banks, credit unions, and even retail chains. Each submission wasn't just data, it was a voice, a name, a story that might have once been buried, and for every false assumption shattered, a little more space was made for justice. James, now serving as the national chair of the Equity Oversight Coalition, traveled quietly from city to city, not for attention, but to ensure local branches weren't just adopting protocols in name only. He'd sit in on teller training in Cleveland, speak privately to compliance officers in Denver, and review community feedback in Baton Rouge. His message never changed. The real test of dignity isn't how we treat executives. It's how we treat the man in boots with no appointment. At a national banking conference in Washington, D.C., James took the stage not in a suit, but in the same faded jeans and work boots he wore that day in Chicago. The room fell silent as he approached the podium. Some people still ask me why I didn't reveal who I was earlier. He said, "They say I could have avoided the whole mess. But if I had, then I never would have seen the truth with my own eyes. I needed to know how your teams treat the people who walk in with no power, because that's when your values are real. Or they're not." The audience didn't clap immediately. They just listened, deeply, and that pause meant they understood. Meanwhile, Sofia Alvarez, now halfway through her journalism program, was completing her second published article for the Chicago Tribune, an investigative piece on how smaller banks were resisting transparency. She had found her calling, and it wasn't chasing fame. It was chasing the stories that mattered, that revealed the truth beneath the polished press releases. She often carried a screenshot from her original live stream as a reminder. Real change doesn't need perfect cameras, just the courage to press record. Harold Jenkins, never one for fanfare, continued volunteering with the hashtag #StillServing campaign. His story had inspired hundreds of other veterans to come forward with tales of denied loans, blocked transactions, and subtle humiliations they'd once buried. Now they were sharing, documenting, uniting. He often closed each town hall meeting with the same words. "You can't heal what you're too proud to admit, but once you say it out loud, that's when it starts to break." Even Karen Mitchell, still working as a teller under supervision, had become a symbol in her own right, not of failure, but of change. Her humility, her honesty about past blind spots, and her willingness to face former colleagues and say I was wrong had earned respect. She now served as a peer coach, guiding new hires through real-life examples of how bias isn't always loud, and how to spot it before it poisons a relationship. Her favorite quote was one James shared with her during their first reconciliation meeting. "Growth doesn't erase the past, but it gives it meaning." And Jessica Harper, once the face of a national controversy, had become a quiet volunteer at the Veterans Welcome Center on the South Side. She served meals, answered phones, and never introduced herself unless asked. When one veteran recognized her and asked why she was there, she answered plainly, "Because I can't undo what I did, but I can show up for what comes next." That wasn't absolution, but it was accountability, and for many, that was a start. On the first anniversary of the incident, a memorial event was held at the Chicago branch, but it wasn't somber. It was celebratory. Children played beneath the now iconic mural that stood outside the bank. Former customers returned to say thank you. Community leaders gave speeches, and in the center of it all stood James Reynolds, not on a pedestal, not in a press circle, just among the people, shaking hands, listening, nodding. When asked what he hoped people would remember most from that day a year ago, he said softly that it didn't take anger to change the world. It took truth, and being prepared when the moment came. As the sun dipped below the skyline that evening, a veterans choir sang "America the Beautiful" on the front steps of the bank, and in the final notes of that song, something settled across the crowd, not just inspiration, but resolve. Because the truth was, James's story didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been doubted, dismissed, or disrespected. It belonged to every bystander who chose not to look away. It belonged to you, the listener, who now had a choice: stay silent, or speak, watch injustice, or film it, move on, or stand up. And so, if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you angry, or proud, or hopeful, then don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, remember it, because the systems around us don't change with outrage alone. They change when ordinary people refuse to accept the unacceptable, when a check becomes a challenge, when one man's quiet courage becomes a call to action, and maybe, just maybe, when someone like you chooses to be the next spark in someone else's storm. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, like, share, and subscribe. Your voice matters. See you in the next one.